You're listening to the Beasley Philadelphia Radio Public Affairs Show. I'm your host, Marcus Goldman. With me today is Ernest Stuart. He is the program director for the Mid-Atlantic Arts, and he is the creator of the Center City Jazz Festival. April is Philly Jazz Month, and so he is here to talk about what's happening in April, jazz-related. Ernest, thank you very much for coming by to talk today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You bet. Before we get started talking about Philly Jazz Month and all of the things that are happening, can you give us a background on yourself, what you do as program director of Mid-Atlantic Arts, and how you created the Center City Jazz Festival?
Yeah, I work at Mid-Atlantic Arts, basically overseeing their jazz programming. Everything jazz-related comes through me, and any new ideas I might have, like Philly Jazz Month, is sort of thought up by me, and then I take it to the org and we work it out. And fortunately, Philly Jazz Month, it first began its life as Philly Jazz Week, and at the same time we had a meeting with Val Gay is the chief cultural officer for Philadelphia.
Visit Philly.
Yeah, exactly. And she wanted to find a way to tie it all in with what used to be called Jazz Appreciation Month, but she just wanted a fresh take at it. And we decided, instead of going with Philly Jazz Week, make it Philly Jazz Month, partner with the city, and have some fun with it.
Do you have a website where people can get more information, a phone number and social media information that people can have so that they can get involved?
Yeah, so please, everyone should go to phillyjazzmonth.com. And you'll get a schedule. There's information about what's happening, what this is, our partners. We've partnered with the Philadelphia School District, an educational initiative that was thankfully sponsored by PICO and Pennsylvania Council on the Arts. Really great. This has really been an excellent community-geared event. It's wonderful.
Awesome. And what instrument do you play, or should I say, what instruments do you play?
Well, I began my life as a trombonist. I was like any other kid who wanted to play the saxophone, like any blue-blooded American kid, like you want to play the sax. I grew up watching, I'm an 80s kid, so the sound of the saxophone was just everywhere. And I really wanted to play in my school band, but my mom couldn't afford a saxophone. So I got stuck with the trombone, essentially, because it was like the only instrument that was in the closet at school. And it was free. So it was that or nothing. So I got stuck with the trombone. And fortunately, it's taken me around the world as a result. And it's been a crazy journey.
What is it that you grew to love about the trombone? What made you decide to stick with it instead of switching to another instrument?
I don't really know. I think I just really wanted to play music. I can't tell you why. I don't come from a particularly musical family. I just love music, and anything that was given to me was, to me, like, amazing. I'll take it. Just give me the trombone and let me see what I can do with it. Mm-hmm. And by the time I got to high school, I knew immediately that I was going to be a musician. Like the first day I got to my high school band class, I walked into my band director's office and told them, look, I want to be a musician, so I need to get lessons. So who should I call to get private lessons? And they gave me someone's name, and I called the guy, and he told me how much it would cost for lessons. So I went out and got a job at McDonald's. My first job was at McDonald's, and I got that. I was like 15, and I got that job just to pay for lessons. Yeah, it was great.
It's pretty awesome that you've been able to take that passion and tour the world because of that passion.
Yeah. I've been incredibly lucky, I got to say. Even with hard work, there definitely takes a great deal of luck. I've been at the right places at the right times, like walking down the street at the right moment, and someone says, hey, man, you carrying a trombone? And I'm like, yeah. And then that leads to performances and tours. And, I think being prepared is a really important part of it. But there's a lot of luck involved, and I've been incredibly lucky, for sure.
What do you like about jazz? What is it about the style of jazz music that you enjoy so much?
It's really hard to explain. When I first began listening, I was aware of the sort of environment that jazz, comes from or is played in. And I think there was definitely an allure to that. Not just because, oh, it's the Smoky Jazz Club and yada, yada, but I grew up looking and staring at pictures in the back of albums and CDs. And, you see Miles Davis. Who doesn't want to be that guy?
Yeah.
I'm like, I want to be that guy. I don't care. I'm like, I want to look like that. I want to play like that. I want to be half as cool as this guy one day,
Yeah, that dude, the coolest of them all, man.
Yeah.
Really cool. And his work is incredible, the way it's different from album to album, and improvisation and the way he composes. And
well, it's fascinating. There's certain bands that will have eras to their sound. Like Miles Davis had this bebop era, then this post-bop era, and then this cool jazz era, and going into like funk and like this modern era where he was, interpreting R&B songs. And it's amazing. I mean, Radiohead kind of has a similar sort of trajectory as a band where the albums just kind of sound, there's like these different eras of Radiohead. I think that's fascinating when bands have the guts to do things like that, keep evolving and pushing themselves to try new things. I think Miles used to say, I don't like playing my old music. It's like putting on old clothes.
Yeah.
He's just always trying to push himself.
You make some very good points, because it is bold to not regurgitate the same thing over and over. And as human beings, we get comfortable in that position.
For sure.
And jazz is the antithesis of that completely. The free form of jazz, the improvisational aspect of jazz, I think is my favorite aspect of listening to it, because I feel like when these amazing musicians did what they did and created these songs that they recorded, they played by feels.
Yeah. Jazz is fascinating in that it's partially an intellectual exercise, right? Because you need to know the rules to the game. But then you have to sort of launch yourself off of
you break the rules.
Yeah, you have to break all of the rules, and you have to, decide which ones you're going to follow and when you're going to follow them, and which ones you're going to completely disregard, and at the same time, you kind of have to do it instinctively and not have all of that going on in your head, or else you're doomed.
Yeah.
You kind of have to get the rules so embedded into your thinking that you don't think about it. And then when you play, it's counterintuitive, but you just have to throw it all out and sort of have this negotiation happening inside of you, and your instincts. And, it's really amazing.
It is. And getting back to Philly Jazz Month and April, you have some great performances that are scheduled on the calendar, which they can find at the website, phillyjazzmonth.com. Do you want to talk about maybe some of the performers that will be performing so people can get a taste of what's ahead?
Yeah, and so the one thing I always say when I talk about this is that jazz happens all year round in Philly. Philly is a jazz city. We can talk about all of the incredible artists that come from Philly, which there are many, and some of the architects of this music. But jazz is happening year-round in Philly, and it's happening all around the city. But what we were able to do was fund a number of events around, like just help fund, not even totally, but just, hey, who needs help funding, whatever they're thinking about doing during this month? And let's see what we can do. So of those, we have a really great list of things happening around Philly in April. One of which is Orrin Evans is going to be performing at Chris's Jazz Cafe for his 50th birthday. It's going to be incredible. It's going to actually be multi-day beginning on April 2nd. And I think for a good part of that week. He'll be there nightly performing with a different artist. Yeah, Oren is incredible pianist. There's the East Passyunk Jazz Crawl, which, they'll have performers jumping around to different spaces on East Passyunk. And it's similar actually to the Center City Jazz Festival in that way, but very casual and open to everyone. It takes place from 12 to 6 that day. That's happening April 5th. At the Clef Club, Nabate Isles is going to be there the 5th as well. There's a really great festival happening out in Germantown called the Germantown Jazz Festival, which is excellent. It's brand new. It's the inaugural Germantown Jazz Fest, which we're completely excited to be a part of this. An incredible trumpeter who runs the jazz department over at Temple University, Terrell Stafford, is going to perform with his quintet live at this space called Not So Latin. And I love talking about Not So Latin. It's a space in South Philly where a musician basically turned his living room into a performance space. And it's a pretty big living room, but the fact that he, just said, look, I really want to host some friends playing. And that turned into a more regular event, and then it turned into a series, and it's been going for years now. And it's one of the most unique spaces that you can hear jazz in Philly.
Is it video available or is it audio available for the
Terrell Stafford at Not So Latin?
Not So Latin is Not So Latin. Like, can you?
Yo, you should go. You should go buy some tickets. I don't know if he films it or if there's some sort of audio recording. But yeah, it's definitely worth checking out because all throughout April, there will be events happening there. I mean, there's events happening at all of these spaces all April.
When are you playing? You knew I was going to ask that. Come on.
I don't have plans to play. I've been so busy getting banners for Broad Street and posters for bus shelters that I've been too busy to even consider playing.
Next year?
Probably.
Okay, good. Good. Okay, so then let's talk about the Center City Jazz Festival. Do you want to give out the dates of the Center City Jazz Festival and where people can get more information and be involved in that as well?
So the Center City Jazz Festival is something that I created a long time ago. I was just reminded earlier today, back in 2012 was the first one. And, we've been running it ever since then. I was going to have the next one happen in April. And once it was clear that we were switching from Philly Jazz Week to Philly Jazz Month, that went out the door. So we're looking to have it this fall. Folks should pay attention through centercityjazzfest.com.
Again, for Philly Jazz Month, you want to give out the website as well?
Yeah, sure. It's phillyjazzmonth.com.
For Philly Jazz Month, do you need volunteers? Like, is this type of an organization that you need volunteers for some of these events?
No, so basically, these are events that are happening in spaces that are fully staffed. And these are all spaces, I mentioned the Clef Club. There's events happening down at Solar Myth on Broad Street. I think that's Broad and Ellsworth. They're all venues and they're all staffed. But, I just think that if people want to help, they'll help by just going out and seeing, what's happening around them and enjoying some music,
With your organization, can people make donations?
Of course.
Can people donate instruments? And how do they go about doing that? Because you need instruments for some of these young jazz musicians to learn on. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what's been great about having a partnership with the Philadelphia Department of Education. It's been really nice to be able to set up this educational component to it all. And we're sending teaching artists into schools to work with students. And big thanks to our sponsor, PICO and Pennsylvania Council on the Arts. They've been incredibly supportive of us in this effort. And if people are interested, on the website, there is information on how you can donate or reach out to us. It's all there.
Let's talk a little bit about the history of Philly jazz.
For sure.
When did the jazz culture start to make noise in Philadelphia? When did that era kind of start or begin?
You know, there's a long history of it in Philly. We've had classical composers, African-American classical composers, who incorporated elements of improvisation into their works. It's something that's sort of been a way of life in Philadelphia for a long time. You know, it's also interesting that Philly is called the great incubator. You know, Philly has a way of incubating talent. So even if you're not from Philadelphia, there's been a long history of people coming through and spending a lot of time here, like John Coltrane or Dizzy Gillespie, whose father owned a store on South Street.
Yeah.
You know, Bessie Smith.
Rosetta Tharpe.
Oh, I didn't realize she spent time in Philly.
Her grave's here.
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
Whoa, that's a big one.
That's a huge one.
Jeez. Yeah. You know, Billie Holiday was born here. Philly, you know, there's so many great musicians who were born here. Bobby Timmons, McCoy Tyner, the Heath brothers.
Eddie Floyd.
Jimmy Smith.
Yeah. I mean, seriously, the
Grover
list
Washington
is insane.
Jr. It's the list is absolutely bonkers.
Yeah.
And you know, this is something, you know, I feel like in places like New Orleans, there's more of a general awareness of their sort of cultural heritage. And Philadelphia has this incredible cultural heritage that I wish we as Philadelphians had a broader awareness of, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I think part of what we're trying to do is just have these discussions and talk about it. And it doesn't end with jazz. You know, we could be talking about rock or
doo-wop
or the sound of Philly. Or we have this incredible cultural heritage in this city, you know? And we should be walking around talking about it nonstop to anyone who comes to Philadelphia.
Absolutely.
You know? I mean, it's ridiculous how good we've had it here in Philly.
It's insane the amount of talent, the talent that's come out of Philadelphia. In Hollywood, there are a lot of people that are tied to Philadelphia, script writers, producers, a lot of behind-the-scenes people. I mean, you have big names like Bradley Cooper, too, but...
Coleman, Domingo, Oscar-winning actor. You know, I mean, he's been doing incredibly well lately. Yeah, there's a wealth of talent here that come from here. And like I said, you know, it's not even folks who are born here all the time. It's people who come here and spend time and drink the water.
And eat the food.
And all of a sudden, I'm just saying, you know, all of a sudden talent just starts to spike, you know.
Cheesesteaks make you more creative, I swear.
It's the water ice, man. The water ice and cheesesteaks, they will get you.
And the hoagies and all that.
It's all soul food. All of that is food that's great for your soul. The one thing that I know for a fact that Philly does incredibly well, you know, they call this city the city of neighborhoods. And I think that's because we do community really well. And whenever I'm out of Philly for an extended period of time, I miss the community of people. Growing up as a musician, you're in clubs all the time. You're in all different types of venues and restaurants. You know, I have great friends who are dishwashers, who are servers, who are restaurant owners, who are politicians. You know, at one point I had the mayor's phone number, his cell phone number in my pocket. You can do that here in Philly. You know, community means a lot here.
It does.
You know, and I think that's why we incubate so much talent. There's something just warming about this place, you know?
I agree. I'm not a native of Philadelphia. I moved here 22 years, almost 23 years ago, and I would not leave. I will spend the rest of my life here and travel out from Philadelphia. I love this city so much.
Yeah.
And I love it more and more every day. I just love this place. So
yeah.
I'm grateful to be here.
Yeah, so historically, you know, looking back, you begin to get into some of the early bebop stages of jazz, and we have architects there. You know, we have the Heath brothers, and I know I mentioned them, but they were incredible. And they went on to impact jazz globally, you know. Bobby Timmons, who went on to play with the Jazz Messengers, and there's Philly Joe Jones, and you keep going through all the different eras of jazz, and there's people there. There's hard bop, McCoy Tyner from Philly, and I can't remember everyone because there's so many, but Jimmy Smith, he released one of the highest grossing jazz albums of all time. Organist, it's to Miss Grover Washington Jr. Moving on to more contemporary jazz, it's really amazing what we've been able to do here.
I remember hearing Grover Washington Jr. in the late 70s, early 80s for the first time and just being blown away.
Yeah.
We had some friends who were really into him, and they played one of his albums, and I was the kid who loved albums and would listen to whenever the adults put on music. That's where I was. I wasn't running around with everybody else. I was listening to whatever they put on.
And it's interesting because I remember being a kid watching like the Channel 6 news, and it seemed like Grover was on the news all the time. You would turn it on and you'll see him doing something amazing, and he kind of just became a household name that way. It's really cool.
Yeah. I guess I've always had a draw to this city and its history. Now, if people want to go see jazz now, besides Not So Latin, where's some other great places to catch jazz music in the city of Philadelphia?
Sure. So Chris's Jazz Cafe is a great spot to start. Also, there's right down the street from Chris's is Time Restaurant, which has music 7 nights a week. Up Broad Street, there's South Jazz Kitchen, which is an amazing place. It's owned by the Bynum brothers, who owned music clubs all over Philly for years. They used to own a spot called Zanzibar Blue on Broad Street. I remember my my first time playing at Zanzibar. It was with a vocalist named Jaguar Wright. But being able to play in Zanzibar, I felt like I made it.
Yeah. That's awesome.
I felt like I made it. Also, there's a place called Solar Myth. It's basically Boot and Saddle. It was just reopened as a cafe and bar called Solar Myth. Yeah, there's a great venue in there, a jazz club. They go from like straight ahead to experimental jazz and really fun, interesting stuff going on there.
Taking somebody to see jazz music live is a fun date night. Really fun date night.
It's like the easiest way to make yourself seem more cultured than you are.
Yeah, totally. And it's great. And yeah, it's fun. I love jazz music. Herbie Hancock's Empyrean Isles is one of my all-time favorite albums.
Man. Yeah.
And I'm a big fan of Colossus is another one that's a huge album. And then Kinda Blue, a childhood friend of mine turned me on to that. And that was my first real taste of big-time jazz. And that album hooked me into wanting to know more about everything jazz.
Yeah, I remember getting that album and trying to play along to it. And getting so frustrated that I couldn't play like that. Yeah. I mean, it really is a great album. And go to a jazz club, take your date to a jazz club. It's the easiest alley-oop or dunk that you could get out there when it comes to seeming interesting.
Absolutely. That is definitely, and you'll have great conversation afterwards and during because the music will do that.
One of my worst date nights happening in a jazz club. I was at Zanzibar Blue, actually. I completely forgot it was at Zanzibar. And I was trying to have a conversation with this young lady I was on a date with, and this was when I was in college. Save up some money, take someone out on a date, and I was trying just to have a conversation and pull information out of her, and she just wasn't really talking, at all. And I just kept going and trying to just get any sort of conversation started. And it just wasn't happening. And there was a great show happening and the place was packed and, I'm struggling. And a husband and wife couple seated at the table next to us finished eating. And as they were leaving, the husband who was sitting next to me on my side kind of got up and leaned into my ear and said, "Good luck." on his way out. It's just I was like, oh man, he sees me struggle.
Oh man.
He sees me struggling. But yeah, other than that, jazz clubs are incredible.
Wow. Again with me is Ernest Stuart. He is the program director of the Mid-Atlantic Arts and creator of the Center City Jazz Festival, which will be happening this fall. Could you give out the website again for Philly Jazz Month and any other information we might need as we wrap it up? Anything we forgot to talk about?
I think we hit it. So that's phillyjazzmonth.com. On there, you will find a schedule of selected events. You'll find information about what we're doing with education and how we're partnering with the school district. And you'll also find ways to contribute financially to what we're doing. And, we hope to stay partnered with the city well into the future. They've been incredible partners in all of this and have been just a dream to work with, for sure.
Well, thank you very much, Ernest. Appreciate it and enjoyed the conversation. Jazz is always fun to talk about.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me.
You bet.